Everybody ready?
Sure.
All right. So I'm gonna have to stand behind you guys right here so I can get into the shot. So welcome to What is ESG and why is it important? So we've got three amazing panelists today that are going to cover a series of questions and topics for us to give us some insights. For those of you that are experts, I hope you'll still learn something. And for those that are you're just now trying to figure out what actually it means, we're going to cover all those one-on-ones. So I'm gonna take a sip of water before I get started. All right, so I've got Chris, Christina, and Leanne with me today, and I'm gonna ask each of you guys to give me your 1 minute introduction just on why you're sitting on this panel today, because we've got a little bit of diversity going on here in terms of having worked for the corporation on the inside or having worked on the outside as a consultant and all that in between. So quick background each of you, and I'll start here, Chris, on this end and go forward.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. Chris Talley. I'm a senior consultant to Pierpont Communications, an independent public relations agency here in Texas. And over the last 3 decades, I've spent most of my time in corporate America. So 15 years at the world's largest PR agency, 5 years of aerospace PR, and then the last about 15 years at USAA and served as chief communications officer before taking early retirement last year. And I've touched every element of ESG in every fashion and form you can think of.
All right,
But I do not have it figured out.
we're gonna pick your brain then, that's for sure.
Touched it, I said.
I'm Leanne Bishop. I'm a web strategist and ESG strategist at Brand Extract, where I've been over a decade. My background is all advertising, all the time, a variety of different ad agencies, over 20 years experience at Ogilvy, McCann, JWT. And what brings me here today is just the growing need for ESG reporting and transparency. A lot of our B2B clients at Brand Extract are reporting, starting with CSRs back in the day when God was a boy. And now it's evolved, and so much so that we're seeing such a heavy emphasis on it as this tectonic shift occurs, that we've spun up ESG Reporting Partners, which is dedicated to sustainability and ESG reporting. So yeah.
I'm Christina Senegardi with Virtual CFO, and I'm here today because sustainability really ties together with how we help companies grow in general. We're looking at sustainable growth and not short sprints, right? We're looking at the health of businesses. And more, it's become clear that focusing on sustainability will help you with long-term generation of value to all your stakeholders there and the communities involved in that. So from your employees to your vendors to your customers and to the adjacent communities there. So we are typically working with clients who are not as worried about the reporting yet, but are worried about, and how do I start this? How do I embed that in my in the values of my company, and how is that relevant to me?
Right.
So that's typically the discussion that we're having with our clients and guiding them through how does that help my business grow in the long term and generate that value for me or for my potential buyers.
Yeah.
So each one of you sits at sort of a different intersection, if you will, of the ESG life cycle. From the initial what is it and how do we get started on it to, okay, I've got it, now how do I get it out there, to how do I communicate it and really take advantage of it in that process. So I want to start with a very basic question of what is ESG for each of you, to just take your perspective on that term, because it's been thrown out there and I think a lot of people interpret it a lot of different ways. And I've even heard different definitions for the word, for the letters. Like, I don't always get, what the E is. They give me, something different. It starts with an E, but it's not it. So for those of us that are brand new to that world,
So
let's take E, S, and G, each one of you. What does it mean?
And you're right, we've heard different things too. ESG is environmental social governance. Now, as part of that, you might hear another E for economic, right? There are the different aspects with that. And there are the different pillars that will drive those. So for the environmental, I've heard people describe that as the planet, right? Anything that impacts the planet. For the social part, you're thinking people. And for the governance, which sometimes is another E, the economic, is where people are thinking about transparency, profit, the business side of that, and also the reporting back to anybody involved in the company. But this environmental social governance impacts not just individual businesses. It can be looked at how is that business performing in regards to those three pillars, but it can also be looked at portfolios of companies. So there are many different ratings used for that. And from the consumer side, how they're evaluating businesses, they're also investors, how they're evaluating those businesses, how they rank them as well.
I like how you described that. You could almost just translate it into PPP. So planet, people, process, or planet, people, performance.
Yeah,
Or purpose.
Purpose.
Purpose
Mhm.
Yeah.
or profits.
Yeah.
You know, there's said we're in there for profit to, but it's the question is how are you going to get to that?
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I think it's a breakdown of that divider between social value and market value, that used to be two different things, whether it was qualitative and quantitative. And now I think it's all meshing nicely together. I think that in terms of E, S, and G, I think of those as just ways of looking at your business. And you may already have financial data, or you may already have qualitative data about, your diversity background, how many people you're employing of color or, male, female, what have you. So you may already have that, that's low hanging fruit. It's just a different way of looking at your business. And I think it helps tell a bigger story, and you could have a bigger impact by looking at your business in these three areas, don't you think?
Yep. I totally agree. It's kind of from a macro perspective, an organizing framework for how to look at your company. So instead of thinking about verticals, in the past we think about corporate social responsibility, and many times that would be a vertical, or DE&I might be parked in HR, and that's a vertical play. So flipping it to an integrated all play where everybody understands where they fit in, and ESG, depending on the company you're in, is an organizing construct for how you put all of the elements of your business together and help people see where they fit in and what role they have.
Yeah.
I think it's an alignment question. ESG just helps you align your company objectives with the objectives of society in general, right? Or the segments that you're focusing on. D&I is part of that, but it's really part of everything in it, not just one aspect or the other.
Yeah.
In general, it will also help you align with specific niches. But if you think about the alignment with your customers, what are customers looking for? If you think of Gen Z now, which is 32% of the population, the research shows that they're willing to pay 50% more for products that they believe are aligned with their values. This is quite different from 30 years ago, right? But that is a shift that tells you can align yourself and your initiatives with consumers to really have a growth in that area and be more aligned with them. It can also be with investors. There are several investment groups that they are evaluating their portfolios now based on ESG and what their ratings are. So SRI, which is the responsible investment scores, are being utilized, and there are many investors or even individuals will say, I will invest in those funds that are considering those aspects.
Well,
that's more important to me.
I mean, it reminds me of BlackRock, my favorite, Larry Fink. I mean, he's got what, $9 trillion that they manage now, and they have a huge ESG emphasis. I mean, and what, sustainable funds last year were $288 billion invested in them in the year of COVID, and that's the 96% increase year over year from 2019. So, I mean, it's not just Gen Z, it's everyone, right? It's the millennials coming out there and saying, look, I want to put my money where my values are. And so they're looking for those, those funds that serve that purpose.
So do you need to be a publicly traded company to care about ES and G?
No. I mean, I think, and, speaking of Larry Fink, I mean, he actually said that in one of the speeches that he gave. I can't recall, he speaks a lot, but, and I love listening to him, but he said, in fact, it's going to be everybody. I mean, it's a huge tectonic shift in the capital market as we know the market to be. And so everyone is looking at this, not just the US, not just oil and gas, not just, whatever sector you want to pull out. I mean, it's global. And I think that, as Nemo said, all drains lead to the ocean, right? So, I mean, it's like, we're all in this together. And so if, if you think about who your customers are or who you're doing business with, I mean, ESG is very interconnected. You're gonna have to pay it forward one way or the other, right? In terms of, I know Salesforce, for example, when they're doing procurement now, they have an ESG component in terms of classifying and qualifying you to do business with Salesforce. And I think more and more companies are going to see that. I certainly see that in our clients in terms of they're writing ESG reports and they want to know, what your GHG emissions are or what your carbon footprint is, or, do you have how diverse is your workforce? I mean, there are a lot of different things going into those decisions about who to do business with now.
So,
and I think if you don't have it, I think it's a huge detriment in the future.
So Chris, as somebody who sat on that large corporate side of things, looking at it from the corporate's perspective, why do they care about this? If you're a small business or a privately held business and you're in that middle market stream or part of their supply chain, why are you caring about what they're doing or what they're saying or what they're reporting?
Well, it's, I continue to go back to this idea that ESG can actually help you simplify how you organize your business and run your business and ensure that everybody that's a part of that business understands where they fit in and their purpose. So I kind of like starting to think about it internally first from a culture, employee communications, employee attraction and retention play. And then ultimately, there's no question that what the studies are showing is that business is creating more value and generating more profit by starting first by organizing around the ESG principles. And I believe the analogy I kind of keep coming back to, because I'm trying to find a way to help project where we're going to end up with this thing, is that it's today we all accept social as part of our life, social media, that is, as humans, as businesses, et cetera. There isn't anybody who's not dabbling with or aware of or has a point of view with regard to social media. And so 15 years ago, you couldn't say that. So if we fast forward 15 years from now, we'll have great data, we'll have organizing frameworks that can be agreed upon domestically and even globally. And we'll also understand how far regulators are going to go into how they oversee how businesses are run, regardless of the size of business.
So you talk about that framework perspective. Christina, from a strategy perspective and the clients that you're working with, why do I care? Why do I really need to care about this as a CEO, a business owner of a privately held company?
So in some aspects, you're right, is to attract the right talent as well, to attract the right customers that can really also help you avoid issues with your supply chain. We're talking, for example, one of our clients, as they are attracting employees, they were considering expansion abroad and outsourcing some of their services. Their team had really great input into that. That's something that they weren't comfortable with for specific reasons, and they were able to voice that. That really create a different sense in their culture in terms of how ethical is our decisions, right? Are we really on board with this? And created a different commitment. That was the alignment from in the decision-making process about one more step in their business. So that in that case, I think it made a decision about how they were going to outsource services, so on their supplier side, and also help them make decisions on the impact of their employees directly. So that is one aspect. McKinsey actually had a really interesting study that showed that companies were long-term, companies that focus on the alignment of these ESG values from really the economic side, not just the social, the environmental side as well, that they were outperforming their peers in the long run. And outperforming because of that alignment. The play is the long-term play and not just the short-term, evaluating consequences in the long term too.
When you organize inside of a company to attack ESG, you get the benefit of, again, this horizontal alignment and teamwork. And so it's almost, I heard one of the ESG leaders from a Fortune 50 talk about just the value and benefit of businesses and leaders in business units that previously did not communicate with one another. Just sharing and the common shared knowledge and the efficiency gain from that awareness horizontally in and of itself is going to drive value.
I have a question. What about private companies getting credit. I mean, we had a client that came to us and said, you know, we're trying to get so much funding for XYZ, and we're being questioned about our sustainability. We're being questioned about ESG. And in order to, you know, get that loan, I think it was like through Bank of America in the Midwest somewhere. I mean, they had to go through a huge.
Right, lenders are paying attention to that, private investors are paying attention to that. There are also subsidies, right? There are different grants, different funding sources. You're going to be only eligible if you're considering all of those aspects. DE&I is just one part of that, but it permeates everything. And if you consider DE&I, what I've seen for many clients also is the aspect related to expanding their markets.
So
Just
for
that.
acronym purposes, for those that
Oh,
are
yes.
new,
Yeah, diversity, equity, and inclusion.
right?
Yeah.
So
And-
when we're talking about that, that's what we're talking about. For that. So you're saying that there's an economic impact for
Absolutely.
ESG. So ESG, Chris has been saying it from day one, ESG is business strategy, and
Absolutely.
business strategy is ESG. It's a different lens and framework that looks across the organization from a horizontal perspective. And then as you start to evaluate these categories, what I'm hearing you guys say is, okay, it's going to affect my capital that I can raise, or the value of the capital, the cost of that capital, right?
Right.
It's going to affect my sustainability. Therefore, you know, which do I want to go work for this company? They're going to be around tomorrow, or, you know, it's going to suspect, you know, am I going to have that lateral social aspect component too, part of the S? So it's starting to impact, you know, HR. It's starting to impact finance. It's starting to impact, you know, what else is it impacting for a private business owner they need to pay attention to?
Well, in terms of their markets, it can impact revenue directly. It can impact your bottom line. And you know, from the CFO perspective, the way I look at it is when you have also a diverse group of employees and investors, you're also hearing different input. You're getting different perspectives that you didn't have before that will impact both product development, you know, solving problems. It will reduce expenses. It is there are several different studies that came out even from Harvard School saying that you know, diverse teams are making better decisions and come to conclusions earlier. From the legal aspect, that's where you have it's a total risk mitigation, right? When you're
So it's risk mitigation.
Yeah, I was gonna
Yeah.
say enterprise risk management, you know, an HSE. I think it affects all of those things.
Yes. And risk mitigation for sure, when you're considering the interests and benefits of multiple groups, the probability of you having a total blind spot, missing a group, or ignoring part of the problem is reduced, and that helps a lot. And some are very, very simple. One company, one CEO was discussing this with, she mentioned that after she hired as part of her team a few people with disabilities, they brought up changes, small changes to their products that would make those products attractive to the disability community. And that is a market share that she hadn't even considered, right? And that was very simple, a simple point of view or suggestions there. And that was a blind spot, right, for them, not knowing that.
The unknown unknowns, right?
Right.
Because you don't know what you don't know, and you find a whole, if you start looking at it through that ESG prism, you might uncover things that it's like, oh geez, I didn't know we had a problem here.
Right, so that just,
you know,
helped them launch another business line, increase their top line for sure. And in others, this will also impact funds they receive. I'm a board member for Beam in Austin, which founds, business that are led by women, founded by women, and we help them find funding and connect them to funding sources. And part of that, one side of the organization also funds those businesses. And we had very strong ethical discussions there about which types of business we would fund and not. And social impact and community impact was important to that. Environmental impact was significantly. So if they did not meet that type of criteria and didn't fit in that profile, then they would not receive funding. And that is very clear based on requests from the community that we're trying to impact. In the panel just before, the CEOs mentioned several things. treating their suppliers in the same ethical way they treat their customers. And I thought that was very impactful throughout the pandemic, how they were able to manage those relationships and continue with them. So the ones that really had this long-term approach, and that goes back to sustainability in working with their suppliers,
Right.
also received a lot more support through this period. Then there were a few other comments that they made about how, it was really important for them to to have integrity in all those relationships and work on those principles, right? And it becomes inherent to your organization. So it is not, ESG is not all soft skills. It's not all soft
Right.
values. It really hits your bottom line. And really retaining talent, as we all know, has a direct impact on your expenses. So, it can be very targeted, and it should be aligned with all the other metrics that you have for your business. This is not something that it just makes you feel good and it's the right thing to do. It really leads to financial gain as well.
Yeah, and I always think that you need to throw away the whole CSR mindset of the last century and really think about, no, this isn't arbitrary and it's not optional, it's mandatory.
It's good for business.
Yeah, and it's going forward, I think it'll be mandatory.
So I'm a believer, right? You've rattled off like a dozen things why ESG is important, from the bottom line to, not just the social aspects, but the HR aspects and all these components, finding revenue streams by looking at, your environmental impact. You can turn, waste product into recycled product and sell it, whatever it might be. So Chris, how do I get started? Like, if I'm at all interested in this topic, what do I need to do? Do I need to have a conversation with my board? Do I need to go talk to my CFO? Like, I'm sold. So now chapter 2.
Okay, so chapter 2, clear accountability and ownership, whether it's the CEO or somebody that has been designated by the CEO. So one of the challenges that I've seen within companies, and USA is a highly matrix company, is who has decision authority. So we have to understand who's in charge and what are they charged with. What organizing framework are we going to use to put the puzzle pieces together to create a pretty picture versus a jigsaw? And then what role, if I've got a board, does the board have to play? Because governance starts at the board, and then take it from there. So it's like, don't be afraid of getting started. So A, be willing to get started. B, understand that no one will ever have it completely solved. And C, just be patient. And so you're going to find areas where you have great data, to your point previously, and areas where we need the data. We don't have confidence in that data, but we'll have to get that to that one in year 3. So accountability, ownership, and really a framework that everybody can agree to. Yep, this is what matters to us in our industry at this time, and this is what we're going to commit to for now.
Yeah, what's material to your business?
So I think that is the key question, because I think it starts smaller than that. For a lot of our clients, they're looking at it, if I were in a manufacturing environment, I can think about different ways. How can I reduce my waste? How can I use less, resources? How can I save in electricity? Different ways that are environmentally impacted, that it's easy for people to get their heads around how to measure that, right? But others say, I have no idea what to do. We're a professional service firm. What do I do? And they said, well, we went paperless a long time ago. We reduced our electricity consumption as well. What else can I do that can be measured? So I always tell them, think about the 3 pillars. The economic, the environmental is one. Yes, there are some things we can do there, and they might be simpler, even to what companies are doing, also changing their commute times to avoid, that's really overuse of the public transportation, depending where they are, or simply clogging the highways, right? That is part of that, having a hybrid environment. I think we all got on board with that now. There are many different ways that you can impact it. The social can be, how do you impact communities? And our company throughout this whole last year decided to figure it out where we can impact nonprofits that are related both to social issues that we support as well as the business community, right? And we were able to do that through our services. So that's an easier thing, depending on which industry you are at. And then, you know, you look at those pillars and figure out what is low hanging fruit, where you can get started, and then you can measure and have accountability. But I think it's this year, I don't know where to start, right? What do I do? D&I, yes, that is something that it's not just about your newsletter and are you hiring diverse people? If they're not succeeding in your company, you still have a problem. You know, D&I processes to really ensure you can bring diversity in, but if you're not inclusive, they're not going to stay and they're not going to have an impact. Now, the biggest benefit for this company is the transparency that it creates at the end, transparency with all your stakeholders. And that is what I would say it has to permeate all your processes.
Yeah. We have a company at BE that we're working with right now, and we just released their initial ESG report that has zero data. Absolutely zero data. And it's all, it's just a step in the right direction with a promise of more to come. So we did a little microsite talking about, you know, what's material to their business, the pillars that they're going to measure to. They decided on a framework. They're doing a materiality assessment to decide, you know, exactly how many different topics do we want to cover or could we cover. And then they're going to release their data and actually map, I think, to SASB and to TCFD, because there's so many different frameworks out there, which we should get to at some point.
I will ask that at the next question.
Okay, excellent.
So
Thank you so much.
give me a window to jump in.
Okay, I'll try and be quiet. But you know, that's coming probably in February. And so it's just baby steps. It's like, you know, that you measure.
It doesn't have to be
managed.
perfect.
So
Yeah.
Chris's point, just do it, right? Get in, start figuring it out, build
Yeah.
alignment. You don't have to have the data.
Call you, call
know?
Chris, call Christina,
Right,
you know?
okay. So you threw out this word frameworks, you threw out SASB, GRI, there's others that are out there, TCFD.
TCFD.
Yeah, the UN SDGs.
Yeah.
So let's do a little alphabet soup here. And what are these
Uh-huh.
and why are they relevant to me as a business owner? How does it, you know, I fit into these categories and the categories have.
Well, I mean, who wants to start there?
I'll go real quick.
Okay.
With my deep knowledge here.
Okay.
So there's a difference between frameworks and standards. So frameworks is how you organize the work, and standards is how you measure the work inside of that. So there are a couple of entities you can turn to. SASB as the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board.
Yep.
TCFD, the Task Force on Climate-Related Disclosures. That's how are we going to get aligned on the disclosures.
And financial disclosures.
That's right.
mainly,
So the
yeah.
SEC is going to be weighing on this
That's right.
this fall. The discussions in Glasgow at the end of the month and into early November will be centered on, can we get global definitions and global frameworks that we can align around? There's an entity called the Value Reporting Foundation, which is the assimilation of two different entities that have been working in this space, and they're driving toward common standards. So there's a number of different resources to turn to. Again, I think the key thing is to simply get your toes into the water and not be afraid of this.
Yeah, there are a lot of NGOs out there that have come up with different frameworks that could help you, and you could pick any number of them. My personal favorite for kind of the minimal viable product is SASB, because I think a lot of people are, you know, used to FASB. And so this is its sister SASB, and it's simple. It's kind of the baseline, like entry level into reporting. And then I think that TCFD is certainly the hot button one. With climate disclosures, everybody cares about your carbon footprint and GHG emissions, and methane, and all of that yummy goodness. But I think that it's just looking at those. They're all online. You can download the standards. You can look up. You can look up your business sector, your industry, and you can download them and just read through them. They're really straightforward. GRIs, you know, a little bit more detailed than SASB or TCFD, but they're all looking at ostensibly the same thing: risk management, governance, metrics and targets, so goals, and what your strategy is. How can you be a better you? And so it's up to you, since there's really no, you know, by law, no definition of what you have to disclose or what you don't have to disclose. Although, to your point, Jonathan, that may be coming sooner rather than later at the end of the fall, or I think, Chris, you said that. But with the SEC, because the US is a little bit behind in that respect. But I think that you can download them and read through them and talk to any number of individuals, and there's tons of articles and,
Yeah, I
you know,
think-
different things out there
Right.
to look at.
The SAS, what I really like, you can go and download for your specific industry, and that gives you suggestions, and by looking at it, gives you great ideas. Where can I start?
Mhm.
Right?
Yeah.
And then you can do baby steps. Before working here in the US, I used to work in Germany, where pretty
Oh,
much
okay.
ESG was part of your daily life, right?
Yeah.
Before the words existed. It was so much part of the culture that it was part of every company. So, you know, restrictions or regulations about buildings and, you know, climate control and building and so on, it existed already there since the early 70s, right? And so it was so much part of the day-to-day culture that nobody even thought about that was important. It was just natural to them. But as it continued to grow over time, companies had what they considered the suggestion box, which wasn't a suggestion box. It was really a very methodic approach to it, where any employee could submit recommendations for any changes in processes, buildings, facilities, anything related to your business that would cause either an improvement on what they were doing, or reduce the negative impact they had in either an environment or society. So it really made that part of their day-to-day. And the best solutions came through those employees. If those suggestions were implemented, it was monetized, right? There was an incentive to the employees to do that. And of course, they received always many suggestions, and not all of them were implemented. But the inclusion of all those thoughts, and it could be really from any level of the company.
Yeah, you're going from shareholder lifestyle and mindset to stakeholder,
Absolutely.
you know, and it's not just, I keep getting here in my face, it's not just internal, it's external too, right? It's if you think from the outward in, I mean, it's everybody that is inside your company, and your governing body inside your company, whether it's CEO, CFO, IR, board of directors, then outside, into the community and into, the world as a whole. So I like that alignment, it makes sense, that ripple effect.
Yeah.
So you said it's all about performance at the end of the day, right? We've got a lens now, we can measure everything, we can decide how we want to report and track on it. And we've got abilities to hit these goals and to make the company better on all types of economic metrics and social metrics, and even from a risk management metrics, and liabilities and things like that as well. So we're got a little bit more time here. So let's get to this sort of the next chapter in the book, right? Which is, I got my data, now what? What am I doing with this data? How do I communicate it internally? How do I communicate it publicly? How does it help me win business, or, raise my stock prices if I happen to be public? But like chapter 3. So Leanne, I want to give Leanne a chance to start this chapter.
Well,
I
I mean,
data.
after you have aggregated data and you've done your materiality assessment, you need to write your report, right? And so you need to define, okay, what am I going to disclose, and what kind of related case studies can I pick and choose to illustrate my point, both from a qualitative as well as quantitative. And at that point, you really need to decide, okay, do I want to be, on the corporate facing website? Am I a consumer website? Do I want to be in print? What topics am I really going to highlight and emphasize? And then it's just drafting that report, and whether it's a digital PDF that you're hanging on your website, or whether it's a website itself, I prefer, obviously, as web strategist, I prefer, a live website with live HTML, because it's indexable, it's findable. Because the last thing I want to do is spend a year or a year and a half going through a materiality assessment and figuring out what is important, exerting all of this time and money just to get to a report that nobody can find, because they're around the corner from the buffet and nobody's looking, right? So I think that that's critical, to have some sort of, public facing website page or public facing website that talks about your data, and where you can, if you are uncomfortable about being found, you can put out a PDF, but I would still link off to it and promote it, with PR, and then you can start thinking about, post-launch, okay, do we have Q&A, for our board of directors and our C-suite? All of those different things to get out there for social content, web content, to promote it, and to really work and partner with others too. It's not just reduce, reuse, recycle, it's relate and educate. And, how do we solve these problems? Are there other partners out there that we can seek out to help us? So I think it just depends on what your ultimate goals are, but you've got to tell your story or somebody's going to tell it for you.
So you're talking about telling it basically publicly, or for prospects, or for suppliers that are going to partner with you, or investors that are going to come in with you.
Recruitment,
so talk about the employee perspective side, Chris. How do you take this data and leverage it for the employees within the organization?
You bet.
And how does that communicate back out to their their contacts of all the people they're touching on your customer side?
You bet. So obviously you start with, what is the data telling us? Where are the risks? Where are the opportunities? How can we tie that back to our strategy and why we, as whatever entity we are, even exist? And from an employee communications perspective, you could always have to tie it back to why we exist, why we are here. And if people understand the why for the organization they work for and believe in it, then the data is going to help connect those dots. So I start with the founding. I always go back to the beginning of why an entity exists, and start at Genesis 1 and link everything back to why. And I heard head of ESG for a Fortune 150 say this the other day. It's about managing the risks and opportunities, and then telling the associated stories, and setting goals for where you're going, and explaining how we're going to get there.
Yeah.
And I think that how is so critical. I know that how is so critical, especially from an employee communication and employee engagement perspective. We all know employees that are more highly engaged are much more productive, much more happy, and much more willing to recommend the product or service or the place of employment to friends and
the more
others.
transparent you are to them, I think the more empowered they feel, right?
Yep. So you got the data, you've got your communication strategies, you're improving employee performance by managing against those goals and those metrics that you're targeting. So Christine, how, as a CFO, you go in, where do you start? What is your first conversation after you've got this data and the report maybe put together, or you've got all your tables and metrics and charts and graphs and all the sexy information, case studies and whatnot? What are you doing? What's your next step?
First of all, evaluate how are those really linked to our operational objectives of the company, right? If they're not, the same way that the communication, your ESG mission or vision should be embedded in the mission and vision for the company. They're not separated from that.
Yeah.
And I think it is looking at how are those metrics that we're following now supporting day-to-day operations and the long-term operational goals for the company. They can't be separated. So if you can, again, it goes back to, you're not just doing this because it's the right thing to do and it feels good to do it. Why else? So by having changed some of your the criteria for your investors, have that brought in more cash. If you are now you have a different process to qualify vendors, or you expanded the types of vendors that you're reaching out to, is that giving you more options, more diversification, or not just necessarily better pricing, but it could as well. So how is that decreasing the risk, of maybe your supply chain risk there? You can also tie that back to what types of talent you are recruiting now, or what is your cost to attract employees? Has that impacted? Has that decreased? Also, how long are employees staying? Companies with a very strong ESG message and metrics seems to have a longer tenured employees, because they feel much more loyal to that. They have a longer term vision. And that's how I would approach it from the CFO metrics, really tying those ESG metrics back to the operational metrics.
All right, so let's wrap this up. we talked about what it is
Mhm.
and why it matters. You know, we talked about where to start and, you know, how to start getting the data out there and communications and internal and external. So if you're going to leave somebody with one thing to take away from today's Zoom podcast, event,
Brought to you by
webinar,
TEI.
brought to you by TEI. Thank you very much, TEI. What is it after 45 minutes of, and I'm sure we could talk an entire 8 hours on this topic.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
so fascinating. But what do you want them to take away? What is your one takeaway to those CEOs, executives, other CFOs that are out there that are listening and watching this right now regarding ESG?
You cannot afford to not pay attention to it.
Yeah.
If you want to keep expanding your market share, attracting the best talent, and having the biggest impact you can as an executive with your business, you should start looking at it. If you're not, really educate yourself and really embrace it. It's not going away.
Leanne, what's
I
your
mean-
one takeaway?
I would say, gosh, my one takeaway, I hate it when you do this, Jonathan. My one takeaway is forget what you thought about, sustainability. It's not environmentalism. It's not tree hugging. It's not even, what it used to be with corporate responsibility and social impact. It is a new version of capitalism to me. I mean, we are in the sustainability age, and I completely agree with you. You are not going to avoid this. This is coming with or without you, and it's going to happen with or without you. And so I think that you have to get on board and you have to pay attention, and you need to figure out, what is my ESG story? What is my sustainability story?
So those that are hiring you are going to demand it. Those that
Yeah.
are investing in you are going to demand it.
Yeah,
Um,
those funding you and giving you credit are gonna demand it.
and those working for you are going to demand it.
Yeah, and anybody
Okay.
that you work for in terms of, who you partner with, they will demand it. We're all in this together.
But it's good for business is what we heard.
Yeah.
right.
It's good for
Yeah.
business anyway. So Chris,
Yeah.
what do you want to leave everybody with? Your last.
Start with the audiences that matter most to you and find out what they're interested in and what they want from you, what they expect from you. If you're privately held, it's probably going to be the board. If you have PE, private equity and other investors, it's probably going to be them. If it's shareholders, they've already spoken and said the shift has happened and you're already preparing for it. So I would start there and then just not be afraid to put your toes in the water.
All right. So thank you guys. Really appreciate you giving us your time and your expertise and your advice. I know you've all got companies, you've all got emails and website addresses. They can look you up with Pierpont Communication or Brand Extract and ESG reporting partners or BCFO.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Yay.